In 1945, a Romanian orphanage ran out of staff. The children had food, they had warmth, they had shelter, everything they needed to survive. But the nurses were stretched so thin that most babies went entire days without being touched. Within months, the children began to deteriorate. They stopped gaining weight. Their immune systems collapsed. Some of them died. Not from disease, not from hunger, from the absence of another human being. The doctors called it failure to thrive. They had no better explanation. 70 years later, science finally does. And the explanation is stranger than anyone in that orphanage could have imagined, because here is what most people assume about loneliness. They assume it is an emotion, something that happens in your mind, something you feel for a while and then move past, like grief, or embarrassment, or a bad mood that lifts by morning. But that assumption is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that has been quietly killing people for decades. Loneliness is not an emotion. It is a biological state. And once your body enters it, something begins happening inside you that no amount of positive thinking, distraction, or willpower can stop. To understand why, you need to understand what loneliness actually is from your body's point of view. Your brain did not evolve in the modern world. It evolved on the African savanna, inside small tribes of between 50 and 150 people. And in that environment, being separated from your group was not uncomfortable. It was a death sentence. A human alone on the savanna was a human who would be dead within days. No shelter, no fire, no protection from predators, no one to share the hunt. So your brain developed an alarm system. The moment it detected that you were isolated from other people, it triggered a threat response. Not a gentle nudge. A full biological emergency. The same cascading hormonal reaction your body produces when it detects physical danger. Cortisol flooded your system, inflammation spiked. Your immune system shifted into a specific mode that scientists call the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. In that mode, your body stops investing resources in long-term health. It starts preparing for an attack. Because on the savanna, isolation meant predators were coming, and the best thing your body could do was prime itself to fight infection from wounds it expected to receive. That alarm system saved your ancestors' lives for hundreds of thousands of years. The problem is that it is still running inside you, right now. In the early 2000s, a neuroscientist named John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago began running a series of studies that would spend the next 2 decades dismantling everything medicine thought it knew about social isolation. What he found was systematic. Lonely people had significantly higher levels of cortisol in their bloodstream. Their sleep was more fragmented even when they got the same number of hours. Their blood pressure was elevated in ways that compounded over years. Their immune systems were producing more inflammatory proteins called cytokines. And here is where it gets stranger. Cacioppo discovered that the white blood cells of lonely people had actually changed the way they were reading DNA, not the DNA itself, the expression of it. The genes responsible for fighting viral infections were being dialed down. The genes responsible for inflammation were being dialed up, as if the body had received a memo that the world was dangerous and had quietly begun reconfiguring itself for a threat that never arrived. This is called epigenetic change. And unlike a bad mood, it does not lift by morning. But Cacioppo's most disturbing finding was not biological. It was social. He discovered that loneliness is contagious, not in the way a virus is, but in the way that a mood moves through a crowd. When he mapped the social networks of lonely people over time, he found that loneliness spread outward through connections at a rate of roughly 1 degree of separation per year. If you were lonely, the people on the edge of your social circle were more likely to become lonely within 12 months, and then their connections became more likely after that. Loneliness didn't just isolate individuals, it quietly hollowed out communities from the inside. And the cruelest part of the mechanism is this. Loneliness changes the way your brain processes social information. Cacioppo and his team found that lonely people became hypervigilant to social threat. Their brains began scanning every interaction for signs of rejection, every ambiguous look, every unanswered message, every conversation that ended too quickly. The brain interpreted all of it as confirmation that the world was hostile, which made them withdraw further, which made the loneliness worse, which made the hypervigilance stronger, a loop with no natural exit. And here is the part almost nobody talks about. The physical damage accumulates the same way interest does. Slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. A decade of chronic loneliness does not look like anything from the outside. The person still goes to work. They still answer messages. They might even seem fine, but inside, the sustained cortisol elevation has been quietly degrading their cardiovascular system. Their telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of their DNA strands that determine how fast their cells age, have been shortening at an accelerated rate. In 2015, Brigham Young University researchers analyzed data from 148 studies covering more than 300,000 participants across multiple countries. Their conclusion was precise. Chronic loneliness increases the risk of early death by 26%. Social isolation increases it by 29%. Living alone increases it by 32%. These numbers put loneliness in the same category as obesity, ahead of physical inactivity, comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And unlike smoking, there is no warning label. Now here is what makes all of this genuinely strange. You do not have to be alone to be lonely. This is the part that most people find hardest to accept, because we have built an entire cultural story around the idea that loneliness is a numbers problem, that the solution is more people, more contact, more connection. But Cacioppo's research showed something that broke that assumption entirely. The factor that determined whether someone was lonely was not how many people surrounded them. It was whether any of those interactions felt meaningful. You can be married and lonely. You can have hundreds of people at your birthday and feel it acutely in the car on the way home. You can be the most connected person in a room and feel like a stranger in it. Because what your brain is actually measuring is not quantity. It is the sense that someone else genuinely sees you, that you are known, that your presence in the world registers to another person in a way that matters. When that signal is absent, the alarm goes off. It does not matter how many other people are standing in the room. In 2023, the United States Surgeon General issued an advisory declaring loneliness a public health crisis. Not a lifestyle issue. Not a mental health footnote. A crisis. The advisory noted that even before the isolation of the pandemic, more than half of American adults reported measurable levels of loneliness. That the average number of close friends Americans reported having had been declining for decades, that the amount of time people spent with friends had dropped by 20 hours per month since 2003. 20 hours. That is not a rounding error. That is a restructuring of how human beings relate to each other, happening quietly across an entire civilization with almost no acknowledgement that anything has changed. So what do you do with this? The honest answer is that there is no simple fix. Because the problem is not that people stopped trying to connect. The problem is that the modern world was not built for the kind of connection the human brain actually needs. It was built for efficiency, for speed, for scale. It gave you 500 contacts and took away your 3 close friends. It gave you a screen full of faces and removed the fire you used to sit around. Your brain is running a 300,000-year-old alarm system inside a world that appeared 50 years ago. And the alarm does not know that the notifications on your phone are not the same as a hand on your shoulder. It does not know that 100 likes are not the same as one person who actually knows your name. The Romanian children who survived 1945 carried the effects of those early weeks for the rest of their lives. Researchers who followed them into adulthood found lasting changes in their stress response systems. Their brains had been shaped by an absence that happened before they could understand what was missing. You are older than they were. You can see what is missing. And unlike them, you still have time to decide what you do about it. The alarm is not a malfunction. It is your body telling you something true. The only question is whether you are listening.